This morning we're hiking up the road to the Acropolis. So I worked my way up towards the Acropolis and past this rock outcrops. It's interesting to see how it looks like they've been worked by human beings, as you see all over the world. For example, straight ahead of us there, those stepped ledges, if you will. It'd be interesting if time could tell us what each of those things was for at one time. And here on this outcropping, pretty obvious, caves down below for whatever, and the whole thing terraced, if you will, and cut out right here. Notice those little squares in there, because we see basis for foundation. So maybe there were actual long-term habitations here. Probably if I had more information and an archaeologist in my back pocket from this area, we'd find that the whole area had been used, every square foot of it. This may be some kind of a roadway. These the structures for whatever. This may have been the original route, or one of them, up to the Acropolis, because we are getting closer. Okay, this is the Fountain of Pinks, PNYX, built in the 6th century BC during the reign of the tyrant Perisistratos, for the purpose of providing fresh water to what was apparently a rapidly expanding city at the time. And most of it's underwater and has branches. I'm gathering that it was all hewn from the rock. And since they used the word tyrant, perhaps it suggests that not only slaves but others were used in that effort. And this, if we had time to decipher it, might tell us more about the system. But apparently it was elaborately enough done that it had beautiful mosaics. This apparently represents the area that we've been walking alongside of. I think this is our road here, and I'm probably correct that what we detected as roads probably were in earlier times, and these are some of the structures. This was the site of one home, a Roman home, during that era, and its mosaic. It looks like a very pretty design I hadn't seen before inside that circle. How clever. And here we can see the remains of what I would call a terrazzo. They're like pebbles leveled at the surface. We do the same thing in today's world. Well, this would have been 2nd century AD. Remember, the Romans revered the architecture, the culture in general of the Greeks. Imagine as we gaze down this stone-walled walkway that people would have said hello to those folks in that home as they wandered up to whatever they were going to do for the day. It's hard in your mind to try to put life into the past. If only there were some way we could. And maybe we will someday. This is the Odeon of Herodes, built sometime during the Roman occupation. Herodes was a Roman who was given Greek citizenship. He was also extremely wealthy, of course. And he built this in honor of his wife, who presumably had died, but I don't know that for a fact. It's a 3/4 circle. The backdrop had a stage also, apparently. It was in the circle that most of the theatrical productions took place. And I wonder what that structure up on top of that hill is. It looks pretty from here. We have not yet climbed up on top of the Acropolis. And apparently down these steps, which we'll go down a little bit later, is the Theater of Dionysus. I begin to get a clue of the spectacular promontory of the Acropolis. A site this ancient and this revered, you cannot ignore any little structure. What was that cave for? Perhaps a hermit? Perhaps nothing. And just some more perspectives. And this is the main central entryway to the Propylea. This, I believe, was built as an entryway by the Romans. But the true entryway is where we are going now. Try to imagine these buildings all complete, all shiny and new, and the crowds working their way up these slopes. So this was the grandest gate of all. It was designed by Phidias for that purpose. And this was the entrance called the Propylea. Notice that this is a U configuration. The left side, that section was the painting gallery, and in there were apparently great paintings. And originally all of this was painted in bright colors. Imagine that, with other statues abounding. Imagine how spectacular that must have been. And apparently, according to Rick, this was designed to be a prelude or a foreshadowing of the Parthenon itself. Notice the Doric columns, simple tops and no base on the columns, but they are fluted. And then there was the triangular pediment that's typical of these temples. Now this is the temple to Athena Nike, and I'll leave it to Rick's explanation. The Ottomans disassembled this temple, and then it was rebuilt again, but the workmanship was so shoddy that just recently it was completely disassembled and completely rebuilt. And a lot of that rebuilt we can see, but apparently it will morph into a common color over time. Now, the original statue up there was 4 horses and a chariot, and the winner of the Olympics, I think in 138 BC or something like that. And then that was replaced by, I think, one of the Romans, I think it was either Julius Caesar or whoever, and his girlfriend Cleopatra had their statue subsequently replaced by Agrippa. This pedestal is the pedestal of Agrippa, and once held a magnificent statue of him. But then over time, that was displaced by statues of other notables who displaced each other successively, and now nothing sits up there. And perhaps that's a great reflection of the democracy concept. Presumably in the past you could access that temple right up those stairs. And there used to be, these stairs used to continue right down. The surrounding slope is all for tourists. Just another pan throughout here.
Вот это как раз их получается. Все так смотрят на них.
I'll try to pan and show a little hint of what it might have looked like if you'd looked back. Although all of this would have been covered, but it would have looked clean, finished like those restored portions there. Look at this stone that I'm walking on, well polished by eons of footprints, but with that pretty rose-colored coursing through it. Imagine the thousands, hundreds of thousands that have walked on these very stones that I, some nano level, am wearing away my portion. Now through the Propylea, pan across this so you can see some of the restoration work, and also in referencing Rick Steve's audio account, you can observe what he's speaking about, as the difference between the Ionic columns inside and the Doric columns apparently here on the outside. And of course we can see the remnant of a frieze up here. Everywhere I see striations, they're not terribly unusual. I'm guessing that what they were is chopped out in order to give people traction. They probably weathered over time, 2,000 years or more. It's interesting, as we walk up through here, you can see the evidence of where they leveled out certain portions for structures of some sort. And notice even here, just before we get to the Parthenon, the rectangular slots carved out in order to provide connection between stones that were installed above them for some kind of structure, perhaps. Well, certainly this flattened out area needs to suggest something was here. Apparently this was a colossal head that stood here inside this temple. How tragic that history wastes what may be its greatest residual. Huh. My guess is that these stones are just warehoused here prior to being lifted into position in the restoration process. The irony, of course, is how much time it will take to restore it versus the decade it took to build it in the first place. A couple of other illusions we may be able to notice is that the columns do not go straight up. Not only do they bulge in the center, but they tip inward. And I think I can notice that in the top maybe 10 feet of this column. Also, the corner column, not that I can detect it because I can't, is apparently a little bit thicker than the other columns. And that was because the eye will interpret it as smaller if it's not made bigger. Don't ask me why. Now this east end was the original actual entrance into the Parthenon. And looking down through the center, we would have seen the, I think, 30-foot tall statue of Athena, the Virgin. She comes in three forms: Promachus, the warrior, and I think Nike, the victor. And here we see also all that remains of the pediment on this end, and also the panels of sculpture underneath the pediment. We'll get up there and take a closer look. Here, of course, a reclining figure. No surprise. There isn't much room for more than that. This other end, something appears to be extruding from that little angle. Whether it's just fallen there or whether that's part of the original sculpture, I don't know. Panels. Looks like a horse. Can't tell. Can't tell. A horse. Imagine when all that was perfect and beautifully painted, and that we might have known it like we know scenes from the Bible because they're so iconic. Here I can take us in closer to the restoration work. Notice that there were inner walls as well as inner sets of columns, enhancing intimacy inside. So that's a horse's head protruding out from the right-hand side that we saw. Probably Athena and Neptune are his equivalent, Zeus. Roman versus Greek equivalent. Now looking at this barrel, it looks like they install a new barrel and then do the fluting afterward. I wanted to look at what looked like pock marks because I believe that's how you would normally attach a plaster fixture of some sort, like a painting or whatever. Maybe there were brass rods or something that went in there. These are all reproductions. Any originals are in the Acropolis Museum, I believe, all worn away just in the last half a century, I believe, from air pollution. And they used to have outstretched arms bent, of course, with the missing elbows. But how beautiful they must have looked when they were fresh. I can remember as a young person, I don't know whether it was college in art history or whatever, being impressed by the inherent beauty, even though I were ignorant about it. So this is the Erechtheion and the porch of the Caryatids. Apparently some of the stones that are out here are the last remnants of the Mycenaean temple that was built on the site before us. This is the north entrance of the Erechtheion. We'll take a closer look at those pretty columns. And notice that here there were columns, or at least half columns at one point in time, for some reason. Here's the detail of the base. Imagine all of that richly painted. So these columns that are on the retaining wall immediately opposite to the north of the Erechtheus are bits of columns from the earlier temple before the Persians razed the Acropolis temple to preserve the bitter memory of that defeat. Ancient Agora, Temple of Ephesus, and that's the Roman Forum, 4 columns and palm trees.
So we must be there.
You see on top, you see the restaurant. And the other 2.
You too. Where's the hotel?
You see the building.
There's the stadium that I ended up.
Come straight.
There you go.
Oh, yes, it's on on the right hand
Yes,
side.
yes.
And then the St. George and
Then the other one, yeah. And
Hey, now we're on the south side looking east. There's that, and that is apparently an original Greek stadium made of marble, and after 1800 years reused for the Olympics that were held here. This is the temple of Zeus that we see there with the columns. There was something like over 100 columns. We'll go down and look at that, as well as the one below us, which is the theater, or the Odeon of and another lapidarium, I guess, unless, no, it appears that this was some kind of a structure too, because there are the outline of the structure and several columns being rebuilt, and some that are chunks of it that are extant. And that's the Acropolis Museum. Notice how the top floor is angled to orientate with the Pantheon that the museum honors. It's from this hill that the Venetians lobbed their mortar into the Parthenon, destroying it. This is apparently the site of a bronze foundry. I think bronze used not only for aesthetic things, but perhaps also for architectural devices. Indicates for casting statues. There were several locations here that did that. As I walk to the theater Dionysus, is this monumental stone wall here. It looks like things existed down here in the way of some kind of structures and area of occupation for something. Don't know. Based on the ongoing restoration on this side of the Acropolis, it was inundated with other temples. Two dramatic looking columns up there. Looking down on the remains of the Odeon of Dionysus. You can only imagine how far up it went. Probably up where those people are up there, the seats went, but could you have heard? I suppose actors had stentorian voices, or had to. Perhaps they were clever in the acoustical design of this place. Some evidence here of structure. And that may have been the backdrop area, as well as the working rooms for actors that we see there. Of particular interest is to look at those seats, which we'll get a closer look at now. Here we start to get a close-up look of these seats. Notice how they're carved nicely. You don't know whether people brought their own little pads. Notice the little armrests, if you will, for putting your own drinks or whatever, and little channels, perhaps, if you spilled something for it to drain off. I hesitate to think what those holes there were for. Every seat has one, except maybe to drain rainwater so that it wouldn't erode out. Notice also those little rivulets on the sides right there towards the front. Maybe those were just little channels for draining rainwater. Square holes, probably posts went up to hold some kind of awning for these lesser seats. And you wonder if these indentations here, whether they were for their feet or whether you put cushions there. Well, I'm guessing that's where your feet went. And they also drained water. An impressive seat for some mucky muck. Looks like it had what looked like carved lion's paws, and then probably these pedestals for statues, or I would think for monumental statues. I think this may have been indicating that there was a box for those really special people. who sat back in here, but then they don't have the special chairs, so what's up with that? You could hear real well down here. That would justify the ticket price. A little hint of the carved grandeur of the rest of the facade, or the stage backdrop rather. Here's what a big hole like this was for. Here it looks like some restoration, whether it's in platinum. It looks like it's in stone. So also with those, it's such a monumental effort to be fixing all of this stuff around here. You wonder if different countries support different projects, or how it's administratively attempted to be executed. It's for drainage, but you wonder if it serves some other function in the theatrical play. The thin walls to keep the peeps away from the stars. Like this area abounded with statues like this honoring their great poets, the Rod McEwens of their day. And this area here may have been all dedicated and been a much, much taller structure, of course, several stories high, with perhaps different stage levels as well as rooms and support spaces. Perhaps they were clever in the acoustical design of this place. Some evidence here of structure. And that may have been the backdrop area as well as the working rooms for actors that we see there. Of particular interest is to look at those seats, which we'll get a closer look at now. Here we start to get a close-up look of these seats. Notice how they're carved nicely. You don't know whether people brought their own little pads. Notice the little armrests, if you will, for putting your own drinks or whatever, and little channels, perhaps, if you spilled something for it to drain off. I hesitate to think what those holes there were for. Every seat has one, except maybe to drain rainwater so that it wouldn't erode out. Notice also those little rivulets on the sides right there towards the front. Maybe those were just little channels for draining rainwater. Square holes, probably posts went up to hold some kind of awning for these lesser seats. And you wonder if these indentations here, whether they were for their feet or whether you put cushions there. I'm guessing that's where your feet went. And they also drained water. The grooves that run from left to right on this center portion are probably for traction. The same concept was used on fortresses in Europe that have steep entry stone walkways for horses so they could get traction. An impressive seat for some mucky muck. Looks like it had what looked like carved lion's paws, and then probably these pedestals for statues, or I would think for monumental statues. I think this may have been indicating that there was a box for those really special people who sat back in here, but then they don't have the special chairs, so what's up with that? You could hear real well down here. That would justify the ticket price. A little hint of the carved grandeur of the rest of the facade, or the stage backdrop rather. Here's what a big hole like this was for. Here it looks like some restoration, whether it's in platinum. It looks like it's in stone. So also with those, it's such a monumental effort to be fixing all of this stuff around here. You wonder if different countries support different projects, or how it's administratively attempted to be executed. This for drainage, but you wonder if it served some other function in the theatrical play. The thin walls to keep the peeps away from the stars. Probably this area abounded with statues like this honoring their great poets, the Rod McEwens of their day. And this area here may have been all dedicated and been a much, much taller structure, of course, several stories high, with perhaps different stage levels as well as rooms and support spaces. These curved pieces may have been for archways. Some nicely carved doors, which looks like a dragon as the motif. What I notice is the stonework here looks like it's so new, and maybe it is. Those are peacocks, I think, or something akin to that. Maybe not. Don't know for sure. You stand here amidst all of this rubble. You try to imagine what it might have been like when all of these buildings were in here, fresh, embellished, the grounds well maintained because of the slave resources that could do that. What it must have looked like. How spectacular. How much it would have been taken for granted for them, like we take for granted the centers of the newest centers, the modern portions of our great cities like New York and Hong Kong. Okay, this gives an idea of what it looks like. This is how that area looks, apparently, where we've just been here. This sanctuary of Dionysus, the Odeon, that area there that we saw under construction, and then this one, I think, must be the one of the Odeon of Herodes. We would have entered the Acropolis right here. Paraphrase Gary Larson, it all just looks like a bunch of rocks. Because after a while it does. Everywhere you go there's more and more stuff. It's kind of like parts of Rome. I have no idea what this is. Monumental, something historical. This is a Roman bath archaeological site. Notice the level of this floor here, and those rooms, and that grade down there. Notice that drainage coming into it, just a small stream of water. And these are made out of individual stones. That's interesting. I didn't realize they did that. And then smooth surfaced with some kind of surface clay. Have to be subsequent evolutions of the same. Notice those pillars there as a substitute for stacks of normally what are square tiles, but there are round tiles. First time seeing round tiles, I think, and the steam or hot air would go through there. Huh, that's kind of interesting. But why this higher level here? I think this is Hadrian's arch, and it's the entryway into what will be the Temple of Zeus. I think that's what this is called. Apparently this was one of the largest Greek temples. It had over 100 of those pillars. Even now it's rather majestic, but these two over to the right here delineate the length of it. Apparently it must have been huge. We'll go inside now. Apparently the layout of the temple, it's a middle-sized rectangular with all the circles in it. It's the actual temple. So this would have been the one entryway, 4 columns, with this fairly substantial wall. He's big enough to keep you from easily hopping over it. This perspective gives us an idea of how massive it must have looked with all of those columns. And the difficulty of seeing through them must have given the impression of one huge colossal block of temple. When you're inside of that, when it was built, probably with a roof, I wouldn't be a bit surprised to give you the same feeling that you get in some of those narrow slot canyons that are high. And those must have been beautiful Corinthian capitals when they were freshly carved. And imagine it all painted. I wonder if it's only like the skyscraper in Dubai that is so novel and so huge that stands out and impresses us in a day of huge skyscrapers filling in New York City or other major cities that leave us perhaps nonplussed. But these things were so huge and so singular amidst everything else in their culture. Only the Acropolis could compete, and did it at the time. Was it considered superior to this? This is the bottom of an entire column that toppled over and has remained. But it then begs the question, what happened to what I would assume to be the 80-some other columns that were here? Part of the answer to my question lies right here. But these look mostly unusable. Mere fragments. They look like just so many gears. This was a pedestal for a statue or something, because it has all of the words engraved on it apparently. I'm not sure if that's what this is, but I know what these pieces were for. This looks like a sarcophagus. Imagine the guy who had this made for himself, or his family did. Now it's just a stone curiosity. I had these fried zucchini the other day and really liked them. So I've been thinking about it for a couple of days, and then I saw these beets, which I really love, so I got both. That with seltzer water, and I'm living in hog heaven. And some bread.